Skype, it should say that you're D&D when you're on the phone, doesn't it? Anyway, let me tell this guy to get lost for a minute here.
It's funny. It's, 9:30 where you guys are, and you're getting pinged?
Well, he's in Melbourne.
Okay.
I have been, like, the past week or two, I've been, like, weird hour person because I've got a buddy of mine, a coworker, he's in Bangkok. And this guy I'm working on with a project, he's in Melbourne. And then the rest of my company is in San Francisco. So, yeah, it's been challenging lately. So, just a second. Okay, I told him to go away now. Okay, now I will pay most of my attention to that and to you guys. Oh, there's a picture. Cool. Let me take a screenshot really quickly because that's the thing that I like to do. Try to make it...
I'll try and stay in frame for a few seconds while you do that.
Should I be seeing you guys? I just see PowerScripting podcast.
No, no, you shouldn't see us on Skype because I'm sending our video to YouTube for the live stream.
Okay.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
Talk again.
I'm talking.
Yeah,
again.
it's doing it again.
Okay, let me do the thing.
Okay. Is there like...
Hal?
Yeah, I'm back.
What did you say?
I said, is there like some buffer that fills up or something? Why does he keep doing that?
I think that's what it is, but I'm not positive. I think things with the virtual audio cables get out of sync with the Azure driver, but I've never been able to track down exactly what's happening or how to fix it. Well, I know how to fix it. All I have to do is launch the interface for the Azure driver and close it, and it fixes it. So I'm not sure why. But yeah, so just let me know when it does that, and I'll do the thing.
Okie dokie.
But know that when I do the thing, you'll lose audio for the amount of time I have it open. So you may hear an audio drop for a momentary audio drop, but that does not end up in the recording, thankfully.
Okay, if you say so. Joe, did you figure out the video widget thing? You see CS and all that? You have to mute it, though.
I did not. So I should turn on the video? I was seeing the chat wasn't working, so I kind of just...
Okay,
it's
if
up to you.
Wasn't working.
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, you can see both of our faces there if you'd like to. If not, it's no big deal.
All right, it's muted. It's loading. Let's see what's on there. Oh, there you guys are.
It's funny, though, because if you don't mute it, it's like 20, 30 seconds behind. So it will drive you nuts to try and make sense of that.
I can notice I'm doing things in the video that I'm not doing right now.
Yes, you're actually
seeing backwards
looking
in time.
at yourself in the past.
It's a time machine. It's brilliant.
I actually just finished watching 2 episodes of Doctor Who, so it's very relevant. We're on season 6.
Did you keep watching 12 Monkeys, Hal?
No, I forgot about it. Is it good? I watched episode 1.
It's pretty good. I'm not sure where they're going to end up going to kind of keep it going, but it's all right.
So, Joe, we're talking about a television show. There's 12 Monkeys. Have you seen that one?
12 Monkeys. That's a movie, isn't it?
It is, but this is a TV show remake of it.
Oh, I haven't seen the TV show, no.
Okay, well then, let's just talk about PowerShelly stuff then. Okay, thank you to everybody in the chat room who has joined us. I see your buddy Michael there. And if you guys have questions for the guest or for us, put a couple hash marks in front of it like so, and we will weave those into the conversation. And with that, provided that our audio still works, Jonathan, we're good to go?
Yeah, we're recording. We're good to go.
Okay, cool. So what you're saying is that we've actually already started, but I didn't know it yet.
That's one way to look at it.
We are live. All right.
Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we're pleased to have with us Joe Levy from Microsoft. How's it going, Joe?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. So, before we get into it, I know you are a program manager at Microsoft. We're going to talk about that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into IT?
Sure. Okay, so I went to Duke University, grew up on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., then Duke University for college in North Carolina. Always been interested in computer science. My dad is a computer science geek, so he kind of brought me up doing it. I made, games for the TI-83 calculator when I was a little kid, and I wasn't so good at geometry, so I wrote a few programs that would solve geometry questions for me on my TI-83 calculator. And, I got to Duke and just got right into it, knew what major I wanted to go into, and started doing classes. The way IT kind of started for me, actually, was not really my choice. I was on the local school newspaper's website, which is called the Chronicle, and they actually have a very large infrastructure and have to manage a lot of page views all the time. Duke is in the news a good amount of time, not always for the best reasons, but there's a lot of good reasons it's in the news too. So we get a lot of page views, and so they had a whole team devoted to not just the website development, but keeping the infrastructure up and running, and things like that. So I was tasked with managing kind of a eucalyptus deployment and all of the virtual kind of machines we had deployed on top of it. And I think basically Microsoft saw that on my resume and was like, a college kid messing around in IT and eucalyptus is kind of rare, so they decided System Center org at Microsoft would be good for me. So I interned here, had a really good time, really liked my manager, so they brought me back, and I wanted to come back the next year, and I've been on the team ever since for 2.5 years, kind of working on automation of IT and cloud operations.
So you went straight into the Azure group then? That was your first role here at Microsoft?
So back when I started, System Center and Azure were kind of separated a bit more. It was kind of the on-premise IT was one thing, and then Azure was another thing. But now, we're getting more and more hybrid, and more things are moving to the cloud, including IT management. So more and more, our team has kind of been aligned with and releasing things in Azure.
So tell us about, so what is your role there at Microsoft? I mean, do you have a single product or a component of Azure? How does that work?
So I'm a program manager on the automation team, and basically we manage the different automation products for the cloud and IT folks. So Orchestrator is one of my responsibilities. Service management automation, which is part of System Center and the Windows Azure Pack, is another one. And then newly introduced the Azure Automation Service that now ships up in Azure. So we basically work across cloud, on-premise, private cloud, hybrid cloud, you name it, we're working on.
Jonathan, we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Joe. Jonathan had to recycle the audio thing there.
Okay.
Okay.
Should I go through that again? Or?
Yeah, let me ask you that again if you don't mind. So
Okay.
Why don't you tell us, Joe, the products that you're responsible for?
Sure. So I'm a program manager on the automation team at Microsoft. So that means I work on Orchestrator, which is part of System Center for kind of IT management. I work on service management automation, which is part of Windows Azure Pack, which is for private cloud management. And I work on the kind of newly introduced Azure Automation Service, which is delivered in Azure for your cloud management. And automation everywhere, and the same team's responsible for it everywhere. So we really make sure that the scenarios work well and the product works well across whether you're using it in the cloud or whether you're setting it up in your on-premise data center.
That is interesting. I didn't realize that you had that alignment. So what you're telling me, and these things all seem to have one thing in common, and I'm thinking that is PowerShell Workflows.
That is a big part of it, yes.
So what came first in the sense that, Orchestrator has been around for a while. Azure Automation is new, and we've had somebody on to talk about SMA before. did all these things kind of come together at some point, and then they're sharing workflows, and then you guys said, okay, we need to do this in the cloud? What was that kind of evolution? When you added Azure Automation.
Yeah, so Orchestrator kind of came first, and it was actually an acquired product. It started as a Palace. And so basically we brought that team in, we brought that product in, and we integrated it into System Center, so it worked really well for all the System Center management of Windows Server, of different System Center components, things like that. And over time, we really liked Opalus and Orchestrator, but we kind of were trying to think about, where are things moving to? What are some other areas that people are going to need management in? And kind of the cloud was a big part of that. Another reason we kind of wanted to move towards PowerShell and specifically PowerShell Workflow, but for PowerShell is because for Orchestrator, all of the kind of integrations you would develop, they were called integration packs. Microsoft kind of had to put out ourselves these integration packs, and they were C# written in a certain way so that you could use them in Orchestrator. But we basically became the kind of main content contributor. And as products released new versions and new functionality came out, we had to maintain all of these integration packs for the tons and tons of things you could integrate into from Orchestrator. So it became very non-scalable. And moving to kind of SMA and the PowerShell model, you had PowerShell modules, which are PowerShell is a huge community already. It has lots of documentation already, lots of samples, and lots of people kind of contribute PowerShell modules and PowerShell scripts already. So it's an area where, by leveraging that as kind of the platform for extensibility, it allows us to focus more on making sure the platform is great and the tooling on top of it, as opposed to kind of managing the individual integration points. So for example, there's a lot of different services in Microsoft, outside of Microsoft, that ship PowerShell modules already, and those are just kind of usable in our products. So we don't have to do all that management of the content, and every team just kind of contributes their best content into the PowerShell modules.
So I've got a question from the chat room that I will ask you in just a second. Hey, Jonathan, can you flip it again? This is really kind of...
this time I'm going to change the buffer size.
Okay, hopefully we will all be here on the... It's quiet when we're not talking.
Significantly, and we'll see if that makes a difference.
Okay, cool. Okay, so there's a question in the chat room, Joe. I wanted to kind of lead into getting to understand the kind of the guts behind the scenes here. So does Azure Automation expose SMA, or is it an entirely different thing?
So SMA came first, but Azure Automation and SMA are basically feature compatible. It's just Azure Automation is kind of us delivering SMA as a cloud-based service where you just sign up and use it, where SMA is you actually install System Center, you install WAP, and you essentially get the same functionality just delivered within your data center, your private cloud.
Okay, that is sneaky. That is sneaky. I didn't realize that because we had somebody, I don't remember who it was, we had somebody on to talk about SMA, like a year ago or something. And I mean, I understood it, but I came to find automation later, the Azure Automation, and that made more sense to me. And it was just kind of interesting that was the interface that I first came to use and to see, oh, this is what you guys are doing. So even though I'd heard the story, it didn't really kind of become real to me until after I started playing with Azure a little bit more and understanding what all was in there.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about Azure Automation is, instead of having to set up an SMA stack just to see what it can do and do you like it and does it work for you, Azure Automation kind of gets you very easily. You can onboard to Azure Automation, just sign up, start using it, see what features it has, and then if for some reason you want to, instead of using Azure Automation, kind of install that same functionality in your data center, you now know, hey, what is this product? Will it work for me? What is it good at? What are the shortcomings? And you can really easily try it out.
Yeah. That is one of my favorite things about, cloud services in general, right? I mean, it's you,
right.
It's just, a click or run a script and you're done. You already have this new service. It's sort of there and ready to work with. So So if it's the same thing, all right. So tell me, what is it that that the Azure team is running behind the scenes to provide the service that looks like Azure Automation? Are these like independent run spaces that are running many of them on one physical machine, or are they independent virtual machines? How does that kind of and can you tell us anything about the way that scales?
Yeah, we don't go too deep into the architecture of Azure Automation, but it's very similar to service management automation, where you basically have web services where the traffic comes in. The web services talk to various data storage, whether it's Azure Storage Tables or SQL servers, Azure Blobs, and then you also have queues, which is kind of where requests to start runbooks come in, and they sit in those queues. And then the workers are actually reading from the queues, hey, do I have any new work I should be performing? And they pick up work from the queues to know what they need to do and grab data about the parameters for the job, for the runbooks they're trying to start, and things from our data stores. And then they go and run these things, and we use regular Azure Cloud Services, web services, and workers to run these. And they go and run it and report back to our data stores, information on how the job is progressing, what output it's had, what verbose logging it's had, errors, exceptions, all that. And one nice thing about it compared to SMA is you don't have to worry about the scalability. We manage all of that for you. So we can, spin up more web services, more workers, more scale units, more regions, as we kind of need to, as more and more people kind of use the service more and more heavily.
So when you're defining and working with Azure Automation, what are the knobs that you're tuning? Obviously you've got a workflow, which runs as a run book. What are the things you do to it, and how does how does scheduling impact the unit cost for this job?
So, there's the nice thing about it. There's not too many knobs to turn. Basically, you're paying. There's a free tier, so up to 500 minutes a month for free. And when you're automating things, 500 minutes is a lot of time. And then if you're going above 500 minutes, we have a kind of basic tier right now, which is a fifth of a cent per minute of execution. So still very, very cheap. And with that, runbooks it's just PowerShell. We're basically, Azure Automation is PowerShell as a service. So you can put whatever functionality you need to perform in those runbooks for, cloud management tasks, IT management tasks. If you wanted to instead, have it, someone wrote something about automatically posting to Yammer based on reading an RSS feed, and they made a runbook for that. So really any task you want to automate, you can throw into a runbook and, have it execute reliably in a very scalable way, in a way where you can see all of the kind of what exactly happened, who did what in the system, what output was produced, a very manageable and kind of democratized way of running PowerShell versus running lots of PowerShell scripts all over the place and not really knowing after the fact what all was ran and where it ran. So in terms of schedule, yeah.
I was going to say, what makes a workflow a run book, or PowerShell script a run book? Are there some additional elements?
Right. Good question. So we call them runbooks, but really they're PowerShell workflows. We call them runbooks because in Orchestrator, they were called runbooks. Before Orchestrator, runbooks were really, and people still do this today, huge books of, manual steps people had to go and do. And so the reason we decided to call these things runbooks is because you're taking all of those manual steps written, in English in a book and putting them in, in Orchestrator graphical authoring workflows or PowerShell workflows in SMA or Azure Automation. So that's kind of why we call them runbooks. But really,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That comes from what is it, ITIL? I think that's a term in ITIL as well.
Right. So it's just PowerShell workflows. Runbook, it kind of does make sense to have as a separate term from PowerShell workflows, because when you think about a runbook, it's more a conceptual word, which you can implement in PowerShell workflow today. Maybe in the future there'll be other languages or basic regular PowerShell you can implement it in. But right now it's PowerShell workflow, so it's kind of a one-to-one mapping right now at least. And in terms of the contents of them, it's all PowerShell workflows, so you can use regular PowerShell in it, as long as whatever you're writing and makes sense in PowerShell Workflow. But we do add a few additional benefits on top of kind of what you get running PowerShell Workflow on a regular system. For example, we have these things called assets, and some of our asset types are credentials, certificates, variables, for example. And what that lets you do is, instead of kind of hard coding values into runbooks or PowerShell Workflows and having the same hard coded value in multiple places, you can just kind of put them in our asset store and reference them from your different runbooks, your different PowerShell workflows, so that if I later need to change that value, I don't have to go around to a whole bunch of different places and change it. And it also gives you a secure kind of encrypted store to store this information, so that you're not kind of in plain text putting things in your runbook that you really don't want people to see the values of.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And I assume that the assets are they passed as command line parameters to the workflow?
So we have a set of activities within runbooks that let you grab them. So like to grab a variable, you do get automation variable, and then the value of the variable comes through. Similar with credentials and certificates. So the way you access them is a normal activity, a normal command line, like you would access anything else.
Gotcha.
And another nice thing about the system is it's not really a syntactical difference in runbooks, but you're basically running PowerShell as a service. So you have API access to start these things over an API. You can see everything that ran in the system, and at any time go and export that data or query that data. PowerShell Workflow has the ability to kind of checkpoint and suspend, which means kind of saving my state, so if I crash, I can come back from that last good spot instead of having to start from the beginning. And so what kind of introducing our service around that means that in regular PowerShell Workflow, that checkpoint state will be saved onto the box where that workflow is running, which means if the box disappears, so does your kind of checkpoint. It's that checkpoint
all right, hold
data
that
is
thought.
maintained. Yeah.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Can you flip the audio again?
Yep.
Sorry about this, Joe. It's not usually this bad.
No worries. It's probably my fault. I'm a bad luck.
Some peculiarity on Jonathan's side. Are we back, Jonathan?
We should be back. Hopefully it'll stick.
Okay, you're talking about checkpoints.
Checkpoints. Yeah, so I don't know exactly where I cut off, but checkpoints in PowerShell Workflow let you save state. And so that if the workflow kind of dies, you can return from that spot and continue on instead of having to start over from the beginning. And in regular PowerShell Workflow, that checkpoint state is saved onto the host where the workflow is running. And that means if the host disappears, you lose that data. You can't resume from that spot. In our system, the running of the runbooks and where they run is kind of independent, so that when they save that checkpoint state, it's saved back into our data store. So if not only the kind of runbook fails in executing, or the VM that's hosting it dies, we can spin it up and put it somewhere else, because we have that checkpoint data saved kind of independent of that place where the runbook happened to be running at that time. Okay, gotcha.
That is cool, actually. So there's a few more questions in the chat room I wanted to get to. When you have people working with runbooks, right? There are some unique things as compared to regular PowerShell scripts. What are the things that you do to help kind of get people started in understanding that barrier, the differences there, and are there things that you find that workflows kind of limit you?
Right. For all the good that kind of PowerShell Workflow gives you in terms of parallelism, resumability, things like that, it does have some limits that kind of, in order to take advantage of those features, some things you kind of have to be more careful of. For example, because all the state in workflows has to be able to kind of be saved and resumed from that spot, it means all the objects you're working with are kind of deserialized objects rather than kind of live objects. And that means, for things, for example, like calling methods, you can't do in workflow. You can do it within an inline script, which is kind of an area in the workflow where things run as regular PowerShell script, but you can't do it in the actual workflow parts. And things like, you may do get VM, and the return from that will be deserialized.vm. That'll be the type of the object.
Right.
And, if you're trying to pass that VM object into another command that accepts, just the VM type, and you're trying to pass it a deserialized.vm, it'll kind of have a cast exception. So
Right.
basically there's, some gotchas, some best practices that you need to kind of learn and follow to, make sure you're not hitting these kind of pain points. And we try to tackle it on, multiple fronts. We have a lot of documentation. We're always monitoring Stack Overflow in the Azure forums and Twitter for, issues people are hitting, and I personally respond to a lot of things across the Azure forums, Twitter, and Stack Overflow. We have wikis out there that provide best practice information, and, some of these gotchas, so that, you can read over that and maybe not run into some of these things. Some of the issues, most of the issues are really PowerShell workflow issues. So even though we're kind of not the owners of PowerShell workflow, because it's how you run runbooks in our system, we do a lot of kind of trying to help people understand PowerShell workflow better. We're also talking to the PowerShell team on, how can the PowerShell team, which owns PowerShell workflow, really improve documentation or knowledge around PowerShell workflow, so people, don't hit these issues, whether they're using PowerShell workflow in Azure Automation or SMA, or whether they're just using regular PowerShell workflow on a system. But it's there's always more work to be done on that side, and we're constantly trying to improve in how we make things easier for users, and some of that is making them aware of these issues, or these pain points in PowerShell workflow, and some of it is making them not have to worry about that. So for example, we introduced a feature in Azure Automation where if you import a PowerShell script, we'll convert it into a PowerShell workflow for you. And not only does that make it, a lot more likely to be runnable without you having to do a manual conversion process, it also lets you see, we comment out we comment everything that we change about your original script, so that you can see, here are some things I might need to change if I was manually trying to, create a workflow to kind of teach the user a bit while they're kind of bringing in their existing content into Azure Automation.
So let me make sure I got that right. Did you say that you can start with a PowerShell script and you'll turn it into a workflow? Or you're turning
Yes.
an arbitrary workflow into a runbook?
No. We have a tool when you import a runbook into our system, if you import a PowerShell script into our system, we'll convert it to a PowerShell workflow. It's not a 100% foolproof process, but a lot of times we're able to bring the content in fine. And in doing that and kind of commenting what changes we made, you can kind of see what some of the differences are between PowerShell and PowerShell workflow.
Gotcha. Okay, that's actually kind of cool that you basically enable people by making those changes, and then like I said, showing you what it was you changed. That would be. Do you have examples of that online? That would be kind of neat to see, like a blog post or something. Maybe you've done this already, where you kind of say, okay, here's where we took a script, we uploaded it, and here are these, and showing people these commented changes and what those kind of indicate.
Yeah, there's a blog post out there. I don't know if you have a way for me to kind of send in the link later, but
we will
happy
put
to send over the link.
Yeah, please do, and we will leave links in the show notes for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And
In fact, we do that in the chat room right now.
Yeah. In general, my team is very active in blogging. I kind of make sure they do that. If they're not thinking about blogging, I'm like, hey, we could write a blog post about this. You want to put that out? And so we have probably might be like 15 blog posts on blog.azure.com right now, which are all about, basics of using the service, gotchas about the service, some solutions you can build on top of our service in terms of like runbooks that may be very useful for a wide range of scenarios. For example, we have a blog that's going to come out probably on Monday, which is about, it's written by Chris Sanders, who's another PM on my team. It's about how you can use a runbook to actually kind of call into Azure Automation and query what are all the jobs that ran in this time period, what are all the changes that have been made, what are all the failures that happened, and it'll actually take all that, package it up as, an HTML or plain text email and kind of email it out to whoever you want, so that without even coming into the portal, you can kind of daily have emailed to you a report on what's going on in my automation system, what failures have occurred, things like that.
Gotcha. Oh, that's pretty cool. I can kind of see this being a really nice way to kind of check on either cloud services generally, whether they're in Azure or outside, but then kind of using Azure Automation to be the hook to bring that basically interact with those services and bring it into your enterprise or into your email, like you just said, or the example with Yammer. That is actually pretty cool.
Yep, I mean, it's all PowerShell, so you can talk to whatever you need to, and there's tons of PowerShell modules out there today that you can just import into the system and start, using command lines.
So wait a second, how do you import something? How do you import something? I mean, what if you had your own module that you wanted to use? How would that work?
Yeah, I should have covered that probably. So just like PowerShell is extensible with PowerShell modules, so is Azure Automation. So in our experience, one of the asset types, which I didn't mention before, is a PowerShell module. And so, for example, we ship the Azure PowerShell module out of the box for you, so it's kind of automatically there. But you can, take a PowerShell module, just zip up the module folder and import it into our system, and then we make sure that module is available on kind of wherever your runbook runs in terms of whatever sandbox it's in, so that you can call all the commandlets, in those PowerShell modules that you import.
That is pretty cool.
Can I ask you a question about the Azure PowerShell module?
You can.
Why is it an MSI? Because that really defeats the point of modules being portable.
Right.
It's Glenn Block's fault.
Yeah, it's we're not the people who put out the module. We work with them a lot, and that's one of the things we give them as feedback, and they're working on improving. I know they are. But it's even something our team runs into, because instead of us being able to just take the drop, zip it up, and kind of shipping it as a global module in our service, we have to actually go and install it somewhere in order to get that folder to zip up, which is a pain. But I mean, there's definitely plans and thinking about, the new PS Get gallery features that are coming out, in terms of how they can ship the Azure module just in the PowerShell gallery, so that there's no MSI. You just use the regular PS Get commandlets to just pull it onto your system. And similarly, in Azure Automation, we want to do the same kind of thing, where from Azure Automation, when you say import module, instead of providing a package, you can actually see what's everything on PS Get, and just click on one and hit import, and it'll bring it into your system for you.
Oh, that's outstanding.
Yeah, that would be the ideal way to do it.
Yep. A lot of exciting stuff coming down the pipeline.
So let's see. We had a couple of other questions here. Got a lot of interactivity from the guests. Thank you, guys. Jonathan, you want to flip the audio again? I'm sorry.
Sure thing. Okay, we should be back.
All right. So, Joe, what are some of the most common scenarios that you're seeing people using with either SMA or Azure Automation?
Yeah. So I mean, SMA and Azure Automation, they're both kind of the same platform, but they're targeted for different scenarios, just because the users tend to be different. Someone using Azure is likely to automate Azure scenarios. Someone using SMA is likely to automate kind of scenarios about their enterprise or their data center, or their private cloud, or their hoster environment if they're a hoster. In SMA, we see a lot of management of WAP. Sorry, Windows Azure Pack. I shouldn't use these abbreviations. A lot of management of Windows Azure Pack, so that you can very simply keep things up and running within your data center. In Azure Automation, by far the most popular scenario we see is start-stop VMs, actually. And the reason for that is because it's so easy to do in our system, and it can save you half a day's cost of running your Azure VMs. A lot of people do dev test work in Azure with VMs, and then maybe they'll forget to turn off the VMs at the end of the day when no one's using them, and so use twice as much cost as they would if they had remembered to turn it off. And so a lot of people import. We have a gallery in Azure Automation where you can just click new runbook from gallery, they select, stop VMs, they import that, and then they just schedule that, and it'll actually, they'll schedule it to happen at maybe, 8 p.m. or something. And then they'll import the start one and schedule it to happen at 7 a.m. And so in that way, they're automatically scheduling, hey, go and turn off my VMs at 8 p.m., go and turn them on at 7 a.m. And so they're, without having to remember to do anything or having to do anything at all, these VMs kind of are auto-managed for the policy that kind of they want these VMs to follow, and they're saving a lot of money.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, especially having them ready. There's just kind of like no downtime for people to wait, but there's also no downside. You're saving the money. So
Right.
You said the word policy, so now I got to say the word DSC. Is there a DSC story here?
So this is going to be another link I send over. Very recently I did a Channel 9, I think it was Channel 9 video about how Azure Automation fits with DSC, when you would use one versus the other, how you would use them together. So we have a story around that, which is essentially DSC is really good for setting how you want VMs to be configured, right? But setting a single VM and how it's configured is usually one part of a larger kind of process you're taking that may touch multiple systems in terms of multiple VMs, or it may touch source control and VMs and, load balancers and, a whole bunch of different things. The process can be very different depending on what your organization scenarios are. So what we think of Azure Automation is kind of the orchestrator on top of DSC as one thing it talks to, and kind of other systems, maybe other things it talks to. So for example, what I demonstrate in this Channel 9 video is I have a runbook that's kind of monitoring your source control system, and when it sees a new check-in to the repository responsible for your DSC configurations, it'll say, oh, you did a new check-in. It'll pull in that DSC into the kind of runbook sandbox, and it'll go and apply it to a VM. And that's kind of as far as I take it. But what you can think of that as doing is it's kind of the beginning of a lifecycle management for DSC. So you may want to take in that DSC configuration, apply it to, spin up a test VM, apply it to a test VM, run your automated test suite. If the tests don't pass, send an email to whoever did the check-in. If they do pass, schedule for, some point in the future during your upgrade window, actually go and maybe make those changes to your production VMs in a way that, maintains availability. So DSC becomes kind of a very important part, but one part of a larger process to go and orchestrate configuration changes across my environment.
Okay,
And that,
gotcha.
That's
I could
even
see a
just,
scenario too where, for example, you're bringing up a new server and it doesn't have it's kind of a generic build, and you put it in a server OU that's for Citrix servers, and you have a Citrix configuration for it. You could have your automation go ahead and push the local configuration to the machine to tell it, hey, because you're in this OU, you're a Citrix box, go pull your configuration using this GUID, and then have it kick off and configure itself.
Right. All kinds of scenarios around managing DSC or using DSC as part of some other process. And then there's kind of what's coming in the future, and we're basically PowerShell as a service, and PowerShell is more than just PowerShell Workflows. One of the big new exciting things is PowerShell desired state configuration. So we're thinking about and introducing features for the future in terms of how can DSC be more, directly first class something within SMA, within Azure Automation, so that it's very, very simple to write, manage, use from even within Azure Automation.
So do you have a sense for how often people are using the Azure portal user interface for interacting with runbooks or other Azure services versus writing code, whether it's PowerShell or C# or anything else, to work with these services?
That's a good question, and we're working to get a lot more data driven on that. I'd say the portal is it's definitely the first experience a lot of people take, because it just helps them walk around and see what's in here, what can I do. But I mean, the fact that we're a PowerShell service means the people using it are pretty good at PowerShell. or will become pretty good at using PowerShell. And that means they very quickly move to, I don't care very much for GUIs. I love PowerShell. Can I automate automation, Azure automation through PowerShell? So we have like 40-something commandlets that ship in the Azure PowerShell module for kind of managing Azure automation itself in terms of starting runbooks, getting job output, creating assets, everything you can do from the portal basically. Creating schedules and registering runbooks to schedules. And we had a lot of demand and asking like, when can we get more commandlets? And until very recently, we only had about kind of half of what we have now. And based on the amount of demand I've been seeing and people asking for those commandlets, makes me think that a lot of our more mature users in terms of their use of Azure automation are kind of moving to using PowerShell as kind of their interface into interacting with Azure automation.
Very cool. So what about graphical authoring tools? I mean, are you going to kind of go in reverse and full circle this with Orchestrator?
Yeah. So I'm not sure how in detail we're talking about this publicly yet, but yes, we're definitely looking at how can we bring Orchestrator users and what Orchestrator users are looking to do into whether it's service management automation or the service version of that Azure automation. How can we make it very easy for them to onboard kind of their existing Orchestrator runbooks into this new kind of PowerShell workflow system, as well as how can we give them similar tools that means they don't have to go and write code or script. They can actually, drag and drop, connect things up. And it's definitely very top of mind, and we're working to make sure automation isn't something that only people who can write PowerShell can do, and it becomes, much easier to do, even if all you can do is use a mouse and keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, because in reality, it takes all kinds, right? I mean, you have different classes of users that are going to be interacting with these servers and services, and as much as, I mean, Jonathan and I have been doing this podcast for like 7 years now. PowerShell's been around for a long time. Even so, we still have plenty of our peers who don't get it. So,
right.
It takes all kinds. So.
It's also, a lot of people really like Orchestrator just because I can't go to my manager and show them code, right? It's a lot easier to say, here's what the process looks like with boxes and arrows in terms of getting your approval and showing you what it's doing. And so even just getting to that level is something people are asking for.
Yeah, I mean, what if you have to go through like a change management board and present, what it is that you're going to be, that you're requesting to do? That'd be a really common scenario, I would think.
Right. So I'd say look forward to the Microsoft Ignite conference that's coming up in May because we'll have a lot of really cool new features to announce then.
Awesome. Maybe I will see you there. I'm
Hopefully.
staffing the booth, so I'm going to be there regardless. Yep, I will be there.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of help to me, and I'm sure to our guests who have been submitting the questions. So thanks for that, Joe. I've got one more question for you before I let you go.
Before we get there, though.
Okay, we have two more questions for you.
I ran across this on the Microsoft Virtual Academy /ebooks site. There's a book out there called Microsoft System Center Introduction to Microsoft Automation Solutions. Is that something that you're familiar with? Do you recommend that for people who are getting started? It's written by Rob Costello, Richard Monsell, Mitch Tulak.
Right. So there are a few ebooks that I'm aware of. I wasn't sure if that was which one that was. I do know Rob, and I've worked with Rob personally on a few different things. He's one of our contributors on the Azure Automation blogging side as well. And so I know he definitely knows what's going on in terms of Azure Automation and service management automation.
Okay.
So while I haven't personally read that ebook, I know Rob knows a lot about how our systems work, so I'd say it's probably a very good introduction.
What other resources are out there for people who are trying to learn these topics?
So the Azure Blog, our Azure Automation category.
Blogs are not a good way to learn a new technology. I mean, you can learn bits and pieces of it, but to like from starting at ground zero, I do not think blogs are great for that, because they're pieces and parts, and people post this feature this month, and then 6 months later they post some other feature, and then I have to try and figure out, okay, well, where do I go next? And that's not always obvious from a blog. I mean, it's great for putting up information, and it's great for, hey, I'm looking for something specific, here's a blog about it, perfect. But if I'm trying to learn how to just how to get started, not always great.
So blogs is one of the resources. I mean, we also have a getting started guide.
Okay.
If you go into the Azure Automation portal and you click on the quick start page, we have links to like 6 different sites that are, it's either the Azure forums, or it's our getting started guide, or it's the rest of our Azure documentation. We have a whole set of Azure documentation and even MSDN content and TechNet content, and wikis, and basically just going to the quick start page in the Azure portal, you can get straight to our documentation sets, which has a lot of different pages that teach you about what is Azure Automation, what is Service Management Automation, what are the differences between them and between Orchestrator, what are runbooks, how do I write runbooks, what is PowerShell Workflow, how do I write that, what are assets, what commandlets are available for you. So we really have a lot of documentation, and we're always updating it, polishing it, making it better based on feedback. And I definitely love to hear, if people are getting to some point and either can't find the documentation for it or don't understand the documentation, sending me a note, even on Twitter, is probably the easiest way, and I can, make sure we get some good polished documentation out for kind of some gaps that there may be right now.
Okay, wonderful.
And you know what I realized, Jonathan, just kind of a comment on your reaction to blogs. I just realized when we had Michael Green and his buddy, I forget who it was, on the show the other week, they were saying how one of the things that they had done was to make a white paper. And he said, oh, well, the white paper was actually a series of blog posts that I edited and packaged together. That's actually that's actually directly applicable here, right?
Yeah, it is.
Take a concept that is bigger than a blog post, and then just add a little bit of organization based on maybe material that is already in blog posts. But it's kind of giving that next level of organization to that content.
Yeah, one of the things that drives me nuts is you have a multi-part series, okay? And I read part 1 and I read part 2, and I don't necessarily even know if part 3 exists without searching for it, if there's no link. So, I mean, stuff like that just drives me crazy, that there's no integration between different pieces that are logically connected. Sometimes you can use tags, but if it's a general topic, that's not really going to work out. So, yeah, stuff like that. And sometimes people say, okay, this is going to be a 3-part series, so you need to look for the other 2 parts, or however many parts it is. But sometimes they don't, and there's other parts that you never find out about because you didn't search for part 3 just because there was a part 2. Anyway.
It's definitely different than documentation. I mean, you also run into issues where it's very point in time sometimes, whereas documentation, has people that maintain it. Blogs could be, anyone write once, puts it out, and then it's still discoverable years down the road, but maybe the content of it is out of date.
Yeah, but even documentation, right, it needs to be flexible. Update help is a prime example of that in the PowerShell world, where they're not even shipping the help in it anymore because it changes so much that you can just go update it yourself. So I wish there was some equivalent for blog posts, which I know there isn't. But yeah, that's, I don't know.
It's kind of like we're in the information age. Information is everywhere, but the organization of it, the finding, discoverability, that's still a hard problem. Maybe it's a harder problem. Yeah. I mean, you used to just, basically go to the library, and go to the section where the encyclopedia was, search alphabetically, okay, aardvark, I've got the edition that has all the things that I need to know about aardvarks. There, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, even books. Books anymore, they're the same way, right? Ravi released a book on PowerShell DSC. He probably spent, I don't know how many months of his life working on that thing, and it came out, after the preview was already out for the next version. So it's out there, and it's already out of date with all the new stuff that's come out since then with the technical preview of version 5. So, I mean,
Jonathan, how do you think the authors feel?
it's got to be horrible. I mean, how?
That's why I don't write books anymore. One was plenty.
One of the things I really like Channel 9 as a resource. Sometimes there's some good stuff on there and how to dig into specific things, but it's the same thing. You can only cover so much on a Channel 9 video. The MVA is really good for some things. I've watched some MVA courses that I didn't make it through the first hour before I was like falling asleep, nodding off. I was like, this is ridiculous. But then you have ones like the ones that Jeffrey Snover and Jason Helmick do that are fantastic. So, I don't know. Documentation is hard. Learning is hard.
Yeah.
Too much info. Yeah.
So, Jonathan, any other questions from you?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, Joe, we've got one more question. This is the question that we ask everybody who comes onto the podcast. And we would like to know, if you could be a superhero, have a superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, boy.
It's very important. Better get it right.
If I could be a superhero and have any superpower, what would it be? Probably
Go with the gut.
the ability to conjure food into existence, I would say. There's so much time where I'm sitting and working on something and, my stomach starts growling and I am just in the zone and, you know how when you're coding or something, you're just really in the zone and you don't want anything to distract you, but if you don't feed yourself, you'll probably starve to death. So that tends to happen to me, and if I could just snap my fingers and, a cheeseburger appeared in front of me,
Food, right there.
That would be so great. Right there in front of me.
You'd
There's a
also be
command,
about 300 pounds heavier.
That's actually the
probably
second time we've had that.
Really?
And
Have we had that before?
the other guy was also from Microsoft, yeah. And he was like, I think it was on with Jeffrey Snover, and Jeffrey's like,
Really?
do you mean, or we may have asked him, are you talking about like solving world hunger? He's like, no, I'm talking about solving my hunger. It's like,
Was it John
that'd
Slack?
be great. It may have been John Slack.
Because he was the only one that was
Really?
on with Jeff at any recent time.
Yeah, I'd have to
That's
look it
funny,
up,
'cause
but
I know John Slack. Now I'm going to find him, and together we're going to invent something that lets you conjure food up together. We'll run a PowerShell module, get dash hamburger, something like that.
That's funny. Episode 290 for people who are following along. Have a link to it in the show notes where you can listen to John Slack. It's probably in there. Let me scroll to the end. Let's see if it says. Yep, there we go. Power to make food appear at will, John Slack.
Wow.
that's funny.
Nice. Okay. Well, Joe, thanks a lot for spending time with us and teaching us a lot about SMA and Orchestrator and mostly Azure Automation, because that was the one that I think you noticed that I was kind of interested in. So we appreciate the time.
Yeah, I'm soon
Hey, happy
probably
to be
going to be
here.
learning a lot more about SMA. I see that in my future.
You do?
I hope
Yeah.
so.
And hopefully the ability to conjure food. Built by
Well,
Microsoft.
teach me if you learn it.
You just use
Find any good documentation.
when you use a Microsoft HoloLens and you just like appear food all around you. You can do it with that.
I hope they issue those to everybody.
I do too.
They've got to,
I would
right?
love to have one. They did that with Surfaces, so maybe they'll do it with HoloLenses too.
I think they totally should.
Yeah.
I hope that Ignite is just full of virtual objects. That's what I'm expecting at the show, by the way. All right. So thanks for being a good sport, Joe. I know we could put you on the spot a couple times. That does not happen every episode. We don't do it on purpose. But
No problem. I really appreciate being here, and thank you so much for giving me a platform to talk more about my love of PowerShell and how Azure Automation can kind of help make PowerShell more manageable.
Very cool.
it is our pleasure. And if you've got any links you want to have us put in the show notes, we will definitely do that. And we'll let you know
Sure.
when it's posted to the site.
Sounds great.
Oh, Vern wants to know, what language are you primarily coding in?
what language am I primarily coding? So I would say I'm pretty multilingual right now. My two biggest ones are definitely PowerShell and JavaScript. I used to do a lot of PHP. I'm trying to learn some Python now. But PowerShell consumes about half of my time, and JavaScript the other half.
I mean, I love PowerShell, but I like Python. Python's good stuff.
Python has some very interesting things, like being able to return multiple items with the return statement instead of just one item, which is a new concept to me. Takes some getting used to.
Michael Green also said we should ask you about the disco ball demo.
Well, let's flip the audio because I can't hear him.
Okay.
And then we'll ask him about that, and you can edit that in where. So we forgot to ask you this, Joe, before you go. Tell us about the disco ball.
The disco ball demo, right? So Michael Green was actually at that talk. We were in TechEd Europe in Barcelona this year, and I wanted to do a very cool demo. I wanted to there's so much about Internet of Things now, and so I really wanted to talk about how you can not just automate, your cloud services and things, but Azure Automation is so extensible and so open to doing whatever you want to do that you can automate, any object you want. So I basically I bought online this kind of Wemo device, which is essentially an internet-connected power outlet. And so through the internet, you can turn it on and off. So I wrote a runbook that can talk to that. And then I went to IKEA and I just shopped around in a Barcelonian, I'm not sure what the term is, IKEA, looking for something. And I asked them, I'm like, do you guys have a disco ball? And they were like, no es un discoteca. And they thought I was trying to go to the club. Because I guess discoteca. No es un club. They thought at the middle of the day at 4 p.m. I'm trying to go to the club for some reason. Anyway, so they show me a disco ball. I buy that disco ball. And so on stage, basically I had a runbook that talked to Google Calendar and to my disco ball through the Wemo. And of course, you could do this with Outlook Calendar or Office Calendar. I just used Google Calendar just to show third-party extensibility. And I wanted the whole presentation, this was kind of Azure Automation had just gone GA, and I wanted to celebrate, whenever I wasn't working, I wanted to immediately be able to celebrate Azure Automation's GA, general availability. So I had it hooked up to kind of a fake Google Calendar work schedule, so that immediately when work ended for the day, the disco ball would just start spinning and I could start dancing and celebrating. So it luckily worked, and people got pretty into it. There was some dancing, some fun.
Wow.
That's great.
Nice.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get to do it over in the States. Still need to figure out the power outlet story because the disco ball has like a Spanish power outlet, and that doesn't really fit here. So I got to get some converters, but soon, one day.
That's nice that you have a Spanish disco ball. Good demo though. That doesn't look.
It was very cool. It's very cool. And now I use it, whenever I'm hanging out at my house and just in the mood for some dancing, I can plug in a Spanish disco ball.
Does it have any sounds, or is it just the lights?
It's just the lights, so I have to do the singing myself.
Okay, gotcha.
Not very
Cool.
good singing. People come for the disco ball, they leave when they hear me sing.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Joe. I had fun, and I hope that you did as well.
It was awesome. So glad to be here. Hope to be on some time in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Happy to whenever you've got new things to talk about. We like having you guys on. All righty. Let's see. Thank you to everybody in the chat room. You were great tonight.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions. That's awesome.
Yep. Mostly Alexander. Well, Vern and Alexander, but both. Yeah, that's
there's
pretty
so
cool.
much interest.
That support. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's PowerShell in the cloud. I mean, come on.
That's cool.
It is cool stuff. Okay. And Vern says thank you. That was good stuff. Okay, I think I was not sure if I was going to be able to bring the energy to the show tonight. I was tired like earlier this evening, and it's because it's 10:30 here, and normally I'm up until like 11, 12, whatever, no big deal. But man, like 6 o'clock came around, and I was like starting to be drowsy, and I was like worried about the podcast, and it doesn't matter. We start recording, it's just on. It worked out, but now I'm probably going to crash.
Well, I hope you have a good night's sleep.
All right, talk to you later, Joe. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Good night, Joe.
See you
Thanks,
guys. Thanks again. Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
All right, that was fun. That was a good show.
Was.
I forget? Do you get links out of the chat log?
I do. I extract them.
I thought you did.
Yeah, I've got a little PowerShell script that rips all the links out there, and then I just post them and paste them in the show notes.
Alrighty. Good luck with your server build.
Thank you.
So I'll talk to you later, man.
All right. Take care.
Goodbye, chat room.
Bye, everybody.